Sherlock Holmes, A Quiet Town. A short story by Benjamin Dawn. Chapter 1. The Invitation. It was one of those London mornings when even the city's sounds seemed subdued, as though the fog had decided to swallow not only the streets, but the very noise of the world itself. I recall it clearly, for Sherlock Holmes stood at the window far longer than usual. He did not speak, and when Holmes was silent, it was never without reason. The letter lay open upon the table. The paper was thick, of fine quality, the address written with care. There was no urgency to it, no agitation. A German sender, a small town called Leer, situated in the far northwest of the continent, close to the coast. A cry for help, I ventured at last. Holmes shook his head slowly. No, Watson, that is precisely the point. He handed me the letter. Its language was factual, almost restrained. No dramatic phrasing, no hint of immediate danger. And yet, something felt profoundly amiss. Nothing has happened, and that is what troubles us. The writer described a house, old, solidly built, near a modest harbour. For some time now, it was said, a complete silence had fallen upon it at night. Not the natural quiet of a sleeping town, but something deeper, something absent. No sounds, no creaking timbers, no wind, no distant echo of life. The inhabitants slept poorly, some not at all. No one could say why. The people there, Holmes remarked quietly, are not asking what has happened. They are asking what is missing. He turned once more toward the window. Outside, London stirred. Hooves, voices, the distant rumble of the waking city. Silence, he continued, is not a state, Watson. It is a contrast. And contrasts always leave traces. The following day, we boarded the train, southward, toward the continent, toward a town that appeared to have forgotten how to hear itself. Chapter 2. Arrival in Leer. Our journey had not been made by rail alone. Before setting foot on East Frisian soil, we crossed the water. The ferry moved smoothly across the channel, its engine producing a steady, almost soothing sound. Gulls followed us for a short while, then fell away. The land ahead appeared flat and restrained, as though unwilling to reveal more of itself than necessary. Holmes stood at the railing, his gaze fixed upon the far shore. Curious, he said at length. One does not feel as though one is arriving anywhere. Rather, one feels that something has been left behind. Shortly thereafter, we reached a small port on the North German coast. From there, the journey continued by train. The train reduced its speed long before reaching the station, as though the machine itself required time to comprehend its destination. Leer did not greet us with noise. not even with the customary murmur of a provincial town. It was late morning, yet the sounds seemed restrained, muted, almost cautious. "Interesting," Holmes murmured as we stepped onto the platform. A low fog lingered, not thick, but persistent. It hung between the buildings like a thought left unfinished. Footsteps echoed more briefly than expected. Voices lost their shape quickly. Even the cry of a gull drifting in from the harbour sounded as though something were holding it back. We continued on foot. Holmes always preferred to pass through a place rather than observe it from afar. The town appeared well kept. Merchants' houses, narrow streets, brick and history. Everything possessed weight, and yet something was missing, though I could not at once name it. "It is not the silence itself," Holmes said at last. "It is the way it is distributed." He paused by the harbour. The waters of the Ems lay calm, almost motionless, and on the far bank the low land stretched out, flat and indistinct. "There," he said, indicating the opposite shore with his cane. "A village. Bingumgaste, if I am not mistaken." I nodded. The name had caught my eye while studying the maps. A place set apart beyond the river. Little more than a few roads, fields, and old houses. "The people here," Holmes continued, "live with the river, but they do not care to look beyond it." He fell silent for a moment. "Some things withdraw deliberately," he said then, "not to remain hidden, but to remain undisturbed." I felt a faint unease, though I could not say why. The fog seemed thicker, though visibility had scarcely changed. Holmes resumed walking, as if following an inner line toward an inevitable point. "Let us see the house, Watson," he said calmly, "and afterwards, perhaps, the far side of the Ems." Chapter 3. The House Without Sound. The house stood in a narrow street not far from the harbour. Nothing remarkable about it. Brick walls, solid construction, a roof that had endured many winters. Precisely for that reason, it appeared unassuming and somehow out of place. Even before entering, Holmes slowed his pace. "Listen carefully, Watson," he said quietly. I did so, and only then did I realize that I had noticed nothing at all before. Our footsteps sounded shorter than they should have, not muffled, rather truncated, as though sound itself found no space in which to unfold. The noises of the street seemed to remain behind us, though we could still see them. The owner of the house, a man of calm disposition and restrained speech, unlocked the door and admitted us. He spoke little, not from anxiety, but from habit. The moment the door closed behind us, I felt it. The silence was complete. Not empty, not peaceful. Complete. I cleared my throat. The sound existed, but it died instantly. No reverberation, no echo, as though the tone had been cut from the air. Holmes produced his pocket watch and held it open in his hand. We heard nothing. He let it fall. The metal struck the floor. I saw it. Yet there was no sound, no clatter, no impact, only movement without noise. "Fascinating," Holmes murmured. He now spoke deliberately louder, His voice sounded flat, devoid of depth. Each sentence seemed obsolete the moment it was spoken. "How long has this been occurring?" he asked the householder. "It is worse at night," the man replied. "During the day, one endures it." I became aware that my breathing had grown shallow. Each breath felt improper, too loud, though it was not. My own body seemed unfamiliar to me. Holmes, meanwhile, moved calmly through the room. He tapped the wall, pressed his ear against the masonry, walked slowly, step by step, as though tracing an invisible pattern. "It is not an absence of sound," he said at last. "It is an interruption." He stopped and looked at me. "Man," he continued, "requires sound to assure himself of his own existence. Without it, the mind begins to ask questions it was not meant to answer." I found myself agreeing with him, and was equally grateful when we stepped back outside. The wind greeted us. A distant voice, the creaking of a mast in the harbour. Never before had noise seemed so alive. Holmes glanced once more at the door. "This is no haunting," he said calmly. "This is intent." Chapter 4. The People of the Town. The people of Leer received us with courtesy, with calm, with a friendliness that sought no intimacy. Holmes and I spent the remainder of the day walking through the town, engaging in conversation, asking questions. In a small tavern by the harbour, at a merchant's office, on a bench near the market square. Everywhere, the same picture emerged. No one spoke of fear, no one of panic, no one of blame, and yet scarcely anyone met our gaze directly when the subject turned to the knights. "One sleeps less well," said an innkeeper, giving a slight shrug. "It will pass," she added, as though stating a natural law. An elderly man who had worked the harbour all his life told us he often awoke shortly before dawn. "Not because of noise," he said, "but because of what is not there." Holmes listened attentively. He asked few questions, allowing people to speak or to fall silent as they preferred. What struck me was not what was said, but what was omitted. No one asked why it was happening. No one demanded an explanation. It was as though there existed a tacit agreement to accept the phenomenon as a fact of life. "That is remarkable," I remarked later when we were alone. "Indeed," Holmes replied. "These people are not repressing anything. They are accepting it." He paused and surveyed the square as evening settled in. "Acceptance," he continued, "is a form of order, and order is always the result of a prior condition." I did not fully grasp his meaning, but I began to understand that Holmes was searching less for a culprit than for an idea that had taken root here. Later that evening, we settled down in a harbour pub. At the edge of one conversation, a name finally surfaced. Not emphasized, not highlighted, merely a passing remark, as though no one considered it significant. "Across the Ems," someone said, "there lives a bit of a recluse, has for years." The name of the village followed almost casually. Bingumgaste. Holmes did not react at once, yet I noticed the slightest change in his expression. a near imperceptible pause. "They say," the man added, "he prefers it quiet." That evening, Holmes and I sat in our lodgings. The window stood open, and I listened to the gentle life of the town, footsteps, voices, the distant water. Holmes made a note in his notebook. "The silence," he said at last, "is not the problem here, Watson." He looked up. "It is the result." Chapter 5. The Explanation. By the following morning, the fog had lifted, yet the air remained unusually still. Even the wind seemed reluctant to intrude. Holmes had slept little. I could tell by the manner of his movement, purposeful, yet mentally several steps ahead. "The explanation does not lie in the house alone," he said as we left the town behind. "Nor does it lie with the people. It lies in between." We followed the course of the Ems. The water moved sluggishly, scarcely rippling, reflecting the sky like a motionless sheet of glass. Holmes paused repeatedly, observing the bank, the dike, the distances between buildings. "Sound," he began, "is movement. It requires space, resistance, return. Remove all of these, and only perception without confirmation remains." I grasped his meaning, at least in outline. "The house," he continued, "is not the origin. It is a resonant body, or rather, its opposite." He gestured toward the landscape. "Flat land, few natural reflective surfaces. A river that carries sound away as readily as it conveys it. And a style of construction designed not to guide sound, but to absorb it." We reached the ferry that carried us across the Ems. During the crossing, the engine's noise suddenly felt conspicuous, almost comforting. On the far side lay Bingumgaste. The village did not greet us with hostility. It did not greet us at all. A handful of houses, widely spaced, gardens, fences, old trees. Everything appeared deliberately arranged, as though distance had been chosen not from necessity, but from conviction. "Here," Holmes said quietly, "someone understood that quiet is not achieved by avoiding sound." He looked at me, "but by denying it any chance of return." We walked slowly through the village. No one crossed our path. No voices, no dogs. Only the crunch of gravel beneath our feet, and even that sounded strangely brief. At the end of the road, Holmes stopped. "This is not an obsession," he said thoughtfully. "It is an ideal." I looked at him in question. "Someone," he continued, "in search of order, will eventually attempt to order the very sound of the world. And if he succeeds, even partially, he creates something the human mind cannot endure." He paused. "Not silence," he concluded, "but control." Chapter 6. The Man Behind the Silence. The house stood at the edge of the village. where the road ceased to be a road at all and became merely the idea of a path. No fence, no gate, only a narrow track of compacted sand. Holmes stopped. "He knew we would come," he said calmly. I looked at him in question. "Not us," he corrected. "Someone." We knocked. Once, then again. After a long pause, the door opened. The man who stood before us was neither old nor young. His gaze was clear, not startled, but expectant. He regarded us without suspicion, without haste. "You are from England," he said at last. It was not a question. Holmes inclined his head. "And you know why we are here?" The man stepped aside and admitted us. The interior of the house was plain, ordered, no superfluous objects. The windows thickly glazed, the walls lined with fabric, not for decoration, but by design. Even here it was quiet, not entirely silent, but subdued, contained. "I have harmed no one," the man said, before we had even taken our seats. "No one disputes that," Holmes replied calmly. The man studied him closely. "Then you understand." Holmes was silent for a moment. "You sought order," he said at last. "Not power, not attention, only order." The man nodded slowly. "Sound," he said, "is unreliable. It intrudes. It returns, even when it is not invited." He gestured toward the walls. "I learned to guide it, to end it." "And in doing so," Holmes said quietly, "you took something else with it." The man looked up. "The echo," Holmes continued. "The proof that something was said, done, lived." A faint hesitation crossed the man's expression. Not fear, reflection. "The people sleep poorly," Holmes said. "Not because they are afraid, but because something that has accompanied them all their lives is missing." The man exhaled slowly. "I only wanted peace," he said. Holmes inclined his head slightly. "Peace," he replied, "is a gift, but only when it can be taken away again." There was no argument, no accusation, no confession in the usual sense, only silence. This time, one that did not compel, but allowed one to listen. Chapter 7. A Resolution Without Triumph. The change did not arrive abruptly. There was no single event, no moment one could point to. It came gradually, almost reluctantly. The day after our visit to Bingumgaste, I noticed it first in a small detail. An open window produced a faint rattling as the wind passed through it, a sound one would ordinarily ignore, and which now struck me like a familiar voice. Holmes said nothing, but I saw him pause. We returned once more to the house near the harbour. The owner received us as before, calm and without expectation. He seemed to harbour little hope, and perhaps that was why he did not appear disappointed. Holmes asked him to place the watch upon the table again. The ticking was faint, but it was there. The man closed his eyes for a moment, not in relief, rather in acknowledgement. "It is different," he said. "It will not remain so," Holmes replied. "Not exactly, but it will settle into normality." The measures taken were inconspicuous. An opened cavity, a passage previously sealed. No demolition, no destruction. Only the deliberate allowance of disorder. Later, when the town had settled into quiet, Holmes and I sat together for some time. The window stood open. The sounds had returned, softly, cautiously, but unmistakably. I did not let the matter rest. "Holmes," I said, "that man in Bingumgaste, who is he, really?" He did not look up at once. "An engineer," he replied at last. "More precisely, an acoustician, trained in Bremen, later involved in harbor construction. A man who spent his life learning how sound is guided and how it may be made to disappear." "And the house?" I asked. "His testing ground," Holmes answered. "He employed cavities within the walls, specialized materials, fabric, layers of air, not to insulate sound, but to fracture it. Every reflection avoided, every return suppressed." He paused briefly. "Combined with the landscape," he continued, "the flat terrain, the waters of the Ems, prevailing weather conditions, this produced something highly unusual. Not silence, but an acoustic void." I frowned. "But why did the entire street feel it?" Holmes inclined his head, as though he had expected the question. "Because sound does not end at walls, Watson. It travels. It distributes itself. And when, at one point, it is consistently denied any return, an imbalance occurs. The surroundings respond, subtly but perceptibly." "And the man himself?" I asked. Holmes looked at me now. "He sought no escape," he said calmly. "He sought control. A world in which nothing returned to him uninvited, neither sound nor thought." I recalled the village, the wide spaces between houses. "Bingumgaste," I murmured. "Precisely," Holmes said. "A place that permits distance, and thus an ideal for someone who values order over proximity." He leaned back. "The tragedy," he concluded, "is not that he went too far. It is that he was exceedingly good at what he did." Epilogue. The Sound of Living. Several weeks after our return to London, I received another letter from East Frisia. It was brief, factual, almost casual. People were sleeping better, it said. Not everywhere, not always, but sufficiently. Holmes read the letter, nodded once, and set it aside as though that were the end of the matter. I, however, continued to think of Leer, of the fog upon the Ems, of the village beyond the river, and of the man who had believed that order could be preserved by depriving the world of its echo. "You could have reported him," I said at last. Holmes looked at me, almost surprised. "For what?" he replied calmly. "For consistency? For precision? For following a thought to its conclusion?" He moved to the window. London sounded as it always did, impatient, contradictory, alive. Man, he said, requires not only silence, he requires proof that something answers him. I understood then. Silence is not a destination. It is an interval. And only in combination with the unstructured, the accidental, the loud, does it become what we seek. Later that night at home, I listened for a while to the city. A carriage in the distance, a call, a footstep upon the stones. And I was grateful for every single sound. Sherlock Holmes, A Quiet Town. A short story by Benjamin Dawn.